The questions here are asking to interpret this particular figure on Siberian jays. What we're looking at on the x-axis are different categories of individuals. So they're either of breeding age, or they're breeding at that point. We have subordinate individuals. So these are individuals that are probably capable age-wise of breeding, but they are not breeding at that moment. And then these are immature individuals who are not reproductively capable yet. And then what it's also doing is looking at, for each of those types of individuals, how often do they call when there's a threat nearby. So this mobbing call that they give when there's a predator around. And then the different colors, the blue and the red, are looking at whether they are living in an area where there are kin present. So in essence, if there's a lot of kin present, then we actually see here this male is giving a lot more calls if there's an area where there's kin present versus not having kin present. And really, if you look through across all of these and compare the blue and the red, you're typically seeing very similar pattern, where if kin are present, there's a lot more calling going on than if they are not. We are also seeing that in this particular case, the males that are breeders are giving a lot more calls than, say, the females are. We're seeing sex differences in the calling, and we're also seeing that they definitely call more when kin are present. Essentially, it's telling us that this calling increasing their indirect fitness because it is directed towards kin, and that will allow them to protect individuals that share genes with them. This question is asking about indirect reciprocity. So they talked about indirect reciprocity, and essentially the idea would be, let's say that we're seeing primate here grooming the other one. Direct reciprocity would be if the other one then returned the favor and groomed it. Indirect reciprocity would be if an individual, let's say we're watching this interaction, and I see this individual grooming the other one, and then later perhaps I go and groom the groomer. So it's an indirect thing. That individual didn't help me, but I saw it helping another individual, therefore I helped it. I don't know that it's truly just a human-specific trait. I think it's probably something that we haven't documented well in other species. It's probably less likely to occur in other species just because it does require a pretty good brain power to keep track of who helped who and that sort of thing. But it doesn't mean that it's not something that we might not see in some of the other primates. And particularly those individuals that can easily identify one another and that have long-lasting relationships with one another, that live in these social groups, we might tend to see this. But again, it's probably not something we're going to see too often, although I think if you were to go and read Frans de Waal's book on chimp politics, you would see that this happens probably quite a bit more than what we are recognizing. This question is asking about this figure on social networking. So this is pretty cool because basically what they did in this particular experiment is they trained several birds. So these are two different basically colonies, if you will, of birds, and they trained these the ones that are represented by the yellow dots, how to use a particular type of feeder. And essentially what they're doing here is they're asking questions about how does that information go from one individual to another, how does it spread through the population. Kind of like there's an old episode, Big Bang Theory, where Amy and Sheldon decide to spread a rumor about having slept together to see how fast it would take for this sort of meme to flow through their friend group. And so what they're doing is they're looking at the flow of this information. So they've trained the yellow ones, and then of course the yellow ones are being watched by other birds that are then learning how to do this. So what's happening is the individuals, the red dots, are the ones who have learned how to do it. The black dots are the ones who still have not learned how to do it. So individuals that acquired this new behavior are red, and then individuals that did not acquire it are black. And then they're also showing that this sort of intensity that you would see here that looks sort of like a food web, spider web, that's looking at interactions between them. So just like you have individuals that you might maybe see on a daily basis and you interact with a lot, but then there's other individuals that you probably don't interact with as much. That's essentially what this is looking at. It's looking at the degree of social interaction. You can also see that certain individuals may have lots and lots of interactions and others will have few. You can see here it spread quite a bit through an area where there was a lot of social interaction. So they learned something, there was a lot of social interaction, so it spread very quickly. The one on the right here is a slightly larger group, and it also doesn't seem to have as much of the interconnectedness as the group on the left. And so you see a slightly different pattern as to how that information has moved through. So they're using a lot of network analysis to try to understand social behavior. The radio collars and tagging are fairly inexpensive to do. We're seeing a lot more studies that will look at this kinds of social interaction between individuals.